Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live Q&A event with OpenAI. Super nice to have all of you here. Over 1,700 people signed up. So I'm sure there's a lot of you watching right now, universities around this event, such as in Tilburg, Eindhoven, Maastricht, Amsterdam, Delft, Utrecht, Twente, Groningen. There's a long list. So it's really great to all be united here today across the country through our shared interest in AI and the future of humanity. My name is Alexandra. A bit about me is that I'm the founder of Catalyze Impact, which is an organization which focuses on supporting independent AI safety researchers. And I was asked to introduce this event for you tonight. And before we hand the stage to the OpenAI researchers, we will briefly go over why we are here today and show you a short video to properly set the stage and give everyone some more background information. We thought this would be good because the topics we are covering today can be very abstract. So we hope to get everyone on the same page and to prepare you for asking some deep and thought-provoking questions during the Q&A. So let's take a look at the next slide. It will come up. Yes, there it is. Okay, so the event today has been fully organized and hosted by the local university groups I just mentioned. And some of these groups are dedicated to AI safety, while others are focusing on the more general topic of effective altruism. Effective altruism is a project that aims to find the best ways to help others and to put them into practice. A lot of research goes into that. And if we take a look at the next slide, there will be a nice graph to illustrate why that's important. Effective altruism is also a research field which aims to identify the world's most pressing problems and the best solutions to them. And it's also a practical community that aims to use those findings to do good. So on the research side of things, that seems really important because, for instance, what this graph illustrates, which is floating somewhere around me right now, is that choosing which problem to work on can very strongly affect how much positive impact your work is likely to have. If you remember from statistics, you can see that this graph has a really long-tailed distribution. So that illustrates that some of these things are really much more impactful than others to work on. So effective altruism has many cause areas it looks at, and one which is increasingly prominent is AI safety. AI safety can be broadly defined as trying to steer the development of advanced AI in a good and safe direction, or at least aiming to prevent the worst case scenarios that AI could bring about. If effective altruism sounds interesting to you, you can get in touch with the local groups after the event. But for the rest of tonight, we will only focus on the topic of AI safety. So why is AI such a big deal? The development of advanced AI could have an enormous impact on both how the lives of everyone today will look like, as well as how the future of humanity plays out. So advanced AI could be the best or the worst thing to ever happen to humanity. So we better get it right. So what potential impacts on the future? Let's take a look at the graph on the next slide. And before I show it to you, don't get scared. I will explain it. So let's see if it's popping up anytime. Yes, there it is. Here, this graph shows what experts in machine learning predict when asked to give their predictions or expectations for the long-term impact of advanced AI. So they were asked what odds they give to the outcomes being good or bad across 5 buckets, which you see at the bottom. So they might think that the outcomes will be extremely good, on balance good, neutral, on balance bad, or extremely bad. For example, human extinction. And yeah, then if you look at the bars, there's a lot of bars here, and each of these bars corresponds to the response of one of these experts. So the vertical bar all the way on the left is an expert who thinks that there's a 100% chance of AI having an extremely good outcome, like in terms of the impact on humanity, while the few experts all the way on the right, where the bar is completely black, think that there's a 100% chance of the outcomes being extremely bad, such as human extinction. So the experts are pretty divided, as you can see. But we can also see that the black block, which corresponds to extremely bad outcomes, is pretty out there. It's pretty present. And so let's do a little thought experiment. Next slide, please. So yeah, there it is. Imagine that 50% of airplane engineers thought that there was a 10% chance that everyone dies. No one would board that plane, right? Yet you could argue that all of humanity is being collectively boarded on such a plane as we speak, without anyone's permission. And as you will read on the next slide, that is the case because 50% of AI researchers believe there's a 10% of greater chance of humans going extinct due to our inability to control AI, which is, yeah, a lot more than I'm sure most of us are comfortable with. And they're not the only ones who think there are serious existential risks from AI. As you will see on the next slide, even the CEOs of the 3 leading AI labs, which also includes OpenAI's Sam Altman, as well as many prominent researchers in the field, have openly stated that existential risk from AI should be a global priority for humanity. You might have seen this in the news a while back. So who's working on preventing existential risks from AI? As it turns out, barely anyone. In this graph, if you look at the purple bar, you can see that an estimated 40,000 people are working on increasing AI capabilities, which means making AI better at what it does and more powerful. So yeah, that's where the money is at, after all. Then if you look at that tiny blue sliver on the left, you can see around how many people are working on making sure that AI does what we want it to do. And yeah, let's let that sink in for a second. More than 100 times as many people are working on making AI more capable of doing things than on making sure that AI actually does what we want it to do. So although increasingly many people are taking AI safety seriously, very little is actually happening to tackle it. Academia, government, and society are massively behind on this. And with progress in AI moving faster than ever, the world desperately needs more people working to safeguard our future with the arrival of advanced AI. All right, so as promised, we will now watch a short video. About the videos, it's 2 videos, 1 main video and a short fragment. So the first one is from an organization called 80,000 Hours. They are a nonprofit which researches and advises people on how to go about having a very large positive impact through your career. And the other fragment is also on AI safety to properly set the stage on what the issue looks like currently. Enjoy.
A long time ago, the distant ancestors of humans were just one of a load of different apes struggling for survival. Then, over millions of years of genetic mutations, we ended up getting quite big brains, and with them, the ability to shape every corner of the world through tools, language, writing, science, technology, and civilization. And now, all the other primates are in zoos, or what remains of the rapidly dwindling wilderness. Why is it that humans control the fate of the world and chimpanzees don't? You might have noticed in the news recently, Google, Microsoft, and other tech companies are rapidly working to build advanced AI systems, artificial intelligence. Over the last few years, there's been pretty impressive progress in AI's ability to get stuff done. Being really, really good at getting stuff done is basically how humans have ended up shaping the world to fit our own needs and desires, and chimpanzees haven't. So as AI capabilities improve and companies and governments pump in billions of dollars a year, it seems pretty plausible that in the coming decades, AI could radically transform our society and potentially displace humans as the most powerful beings on the planet. It's not hard to imagine how this might go badly. We've been telling stories about it forever. Terminator, 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Matrix, Blade Runner, the list goes on. But that's just sci-fi, right? Surely all the engineers actually working on AI in the real world think that these kinds of AI takeover scenarios are extremely unlikely. Unfortunately, that's not true. In a 2022 poll of hundreds of AI researchers, more than half of the respondents gave a greater than 5% chance that the outcome from AI would be extremely bad, e.g., human extinction. If that wasn't enough, in May 2023, hundreds of prominent AI scientists, including the leaders of OpenAI, Google DeepMind, and Anthropic, signed a statement which said that mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics and nuclear war. So why do they think this? How could AI systems go from helping college students cheat on tests to posing a threat to humanity? Over the next 7 minutes, we're going to try to explain how this might happen. Inevitably, we'll be skipping over a lot of the technical details and complexity, but you can always read the 30,000-word article on our website for the full picture. To begin with, let's start with something that many people might not realize. The current wave of AI systems aren't really like conventional computer programs. In traditional software, every function is programmed by humans using explicit step-by-step instructions. But current state-of-the-art AI systems aren't really like this. Instead, they're closer to black boxes. Neural networks made up of hundreds of billions of parameters which arise from a training technique called stochastic gradient descent. So you can train it with a particular goal in mind, but there's no way to explicitly program an AI system's objectives, and it's extremely difficult to know exactly why a model has generated a specific output. The reason this matters is that as AI systems get more and more capable, the worry is that they might try to gain power. Now hold on a second. An AI system is going to suddenly turn into a sci-fi supervillain and want to wipe out humanity? Isn't that just projecting human psychology onto machines? Not necessarily. Imagine you train a super intelligent AI system that has one task only: to make sure your daily coffee is on your desk each morning. That sounds fine, right? This isn't a sci-fi movie. The AI system isn't going to suddenly develop a burning resentment toward you or secretly dream of becoming a ballerina. It's not human. But like with playing chess or predicting the next word in a sentence, it will bring to its simple goal a superhuman level of competence. And that means it could naturally develop some secondary goals without any explicit training. Firstly, self-preservation. As computer scientist Stuart Russell puts it, you can't fetch the coffee if you're dead. Secondly, it's not going to want you or anyone else to change its goal. From the perspective of the AI system, the risk of you telling it to bring you a cup of Earl Grey instead becomes an obstacle that could prevent it from achieving its original one and only goal, bringing you coffee. Thirdly, it will be able to predict that the more power and influence it has, the better it is likely to be at always achieving its primary goal. If it quietly takes over the world, it will be able to guarantee that your local Starbucks never runs out of flat whites. The reality is, you don't have to be an evil mastermind to want to seek power. You just need an objective that involves shaping the world in a certain way. You don't need to hate humans to be a threat to them. They just need to be in the way of your goals, or in the way of your ability to completely control the flow of global coffee bean shipments. And if you think that it would be intuitive for intelligent agents to automatically care for other intelligent beings, well, just look at how we treat chimpanzees, or chickens, or cows, or a large number of other human beings throughout history. Okay, but we're still talking about a computer program, right? Even if it had a reason to, how could a superintelligent AI system wipe out or disempower humanity? Quite a lot of ways, actually. It could engineer terrifying new bioweapons or manipulate companies or governments. It could hack into our military technology or any bank that uses digital systems, i.e., all of them, or really anything that depends on computers, which is most of our critical infrastructure. Before we've even realized what's happening, we might wake up in the middle of the night to find that the city around us has gone dark, the whole internet is down, and our phones are dead in our hands. But okay, this all still sounds a bit silly and abstract, right? Maybe it'll be fine. Maybe AI systems will naturally be docile or otherwise not power-seeking, or AI progress slows way down and ends up taking far longer than anyone currently expects. This is totally possible. Despite everything we've said, we do think it's more likely than not that there won't be a catastrophic AI takeover. But even if AI systems don't develop their own power-seeking goals, there are still lots of other potential risks that need navigating. Advanced AI systems could end up being deployed by bad actors like rogue states, terrorists, or if current hardware and efficiency trends continue, any teenager with a top-of-the-range laptop and a jailbroken open-source model. AI could also make conflict between great powers more likely, develop dangerous new biotech, empower totalitarian governments, leave millions of people unemployed, deepen inequality, or allow for massive flooding of misinformation. Let's be clear, everything is very uncertain. No one can know for sure how this completely novel technology will play out. But honestly, that's part of why it's so scary. It's all very uncertain, and we're currently rushing into it. The people leading the top companies might like to be cautious, but they also face competitive pressures which push them to go faster. If we get this right, the benefits could also be huge. Advanced AI could boost economic growth, speed up innovation, and help cure cancer. But remember, right now, no one fully understands how current AI systems generate their outputs, or how we can make sure they would never be inclined to seek power. And compared to the billions of dollars being spent on advancing AI capabilities every year, we estimated that in 2022, only around 400 people in the world were actively working on reducing the chances of an AI-related existential catastrophe. But we also think that this is a solvable problem. Firstly, there's technical AI safety research. This is working on ways to ensure that AI systems aren't power-seeking or dangerous. For example, some engineers are trying to increase the interpretability of AI systems so that we can better understand them. All the leading AI labs, as of right now, have teams dedicated to safety research, and there's real potential for them to make a big difference here. Secondly, there's AI governance research and policy. This could involve developing policy ideas, creating new agencies, coordinating between different actors, and working with governments and the industry to establish a new regulatory framework. This has started ramping up a lot in 2023. Regulation is being proposed, and politicians are meeting with AI lab leaders to discuss the potential risks. The reality is, nobody knows how the next few years or decades will play out. But we shouldn't just cross our fingers and hope for the best. Right now, we think this is one of the world's most pressing problems, and right now could be a crucial moment to really do something about it. Before we find ourselves in the same position as the chimpanzees, staring out through glass, wondering where it all went wrong. To read about this issue in more detail, find job openings in AI safety research or governance, or apply for a free one-on-one career advising call, check out our website, 80,000hours.org.
Yeah. All right, we'll take a look at the next video. It seems like there is a Zoom error and we cannot press the resume share button. So I think we can just continue. Alexandra, please take the lead.
Perfect. Well, it's a shame, of course, about the video, but happy to continue on. So yeah, let's see. The video might have evoked a lot of questions for everyone. Luckily, we have some experts coming to join us tonight to shed more light on the situation and to answer your questions. Teun, who you already got the pleasure of hearing from just now, will be moderating the Q&A today. So let me introduce him to you. Teun co-founded the European Network for AI Safety. And on top of this, he is working on independent technical AI safety research right now, and he's pursuing a master's in AI. He will take over from here, so enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you, Alexandra, for the introduction, and thank you for your presentation. Yeah, so in a bit, we'll have a presentation by Daniel Coccatello and Jeff Wu. But so let's briefly introduce these people. So Jeff Wu studied mathematics and computer science, and after that, he worked as a software engineer at Google and Terminal.com. Nowadays, he works at OpenAI as a research engineer on the alignment team. And as a hobby, he likes to play puzzles in his spare time. And Daniel has a background in philosophy. He then worked at some think tanks doing AI forecasting. And he did this at the organization's AI Impacts and then the Center on Long-Term Risks. And afterwards, he joined OpenAI's governance team, which is part of policy research. Currently, he has transferred to a different team in Frontiers and is working on a faithful chain of thought alignment agenda. It's very great to have you here, Daniel and Jeff, and please start with the presentation.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, let me share my screen. Can you all see this? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Yep, awesome. Yep. All right, well, good to virtually see you all. Thank you for having me here. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and discussing with you. I'm going to give a brief presentation on the strategic picture as I see it. And then Jeff is going to go into some more technical details about the research that the super alignment team is doing. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. First, a disclaimer. You know, we're speaking for ourselves. This is not OpenAI's official position. And sometimes you might ask us questions that we can't answer for reasons to do with secrecy. And we'll just wave to the next question. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little sort of story, a vignette. This is how I think the future is going to go in broad strokes. Currently, we have chatbots like ChatGPT. Gradually, we're going to transition to more agentic AIs. That is, AIs that operate autonomously for longer periods and can do much more things. So for example, currently with ChatGPT, for the most part, it's just a little text conversation, and you type something and then it replies with 1 or 2 paragraphs, and then you type something else and then it replies with 1 or 2 paragraphs. In the future, people will have made AI systems where they have access to web browsing, for example, or they have access to documents on your computer and they can write and edit documents. Perhaps they can even write code and run the code and then edit the code and debug it and rerun it and stuff like that. So in the future, they'll be less like a little chatbot and more like a human remote worker. There'll be someone who can sort of, they'll be like as if you had someone else on the line who could you know, you could give instructions and they could go do things for hours and hours and then come back to you with the results that they found. And perhaps they could just be running continuously in the background, constantly working on various tasks and, you know, checking in with you as needed. Roaming around the internet, roaming around file systems, writing in and debugging code, things like that. Eventually, I think we'll get to AGI, which stands for Artificial General Intelligence, which means the way I would define it is a drop-in replacement for a human remote working professional. So they're not just kind of like that, they are like as good as a professional human remote worker at all of the relevant things. So all of the sort of tasks that a human remote worker could do, they can do as good or better, but cheaper too and faster. So, currently, ChatGPT can output tokens much faster than humans can type, and it can read text much faster than humans can read. I expect this to continue to be true for the foreseeable future, so that when we do get to AGI, it won't just be a virtual remote worker, it'll be a virtual remote worker that's running at 10 times to 1,000 times ordinary human speed. Also, there'll be 1 million copies of them running in parallel. 1 million, it's a nice big round number. Could be 100,000, could be 10 million. Depends on the details, which you can try to game out and do napkin math for. But the point is that there'll be a lot of them and they'll be running very fast. Once this happens, already, there's lots of important and exciting things happening in the world and lots of interesting things to discuss. But one thing that I want to draw your attention to is R&D automation, specifically AI R&D automation. Once we have 1 million copies of these AIs and they're running 10 times, 100 times faster, and they're able to do all the things that a remote worker can do, one of the things they can do is AI research. So whichever company controls these AIs can, if they want to, put them to work doing further AI research to improve the AI training runs, to improve the architectures, to optimize the code in various ways and so forth. I think that it's quite likely that once this happens, the pace of AI progress will speed up dramatically. It already feels very fast to many of you, and it is quite historically very fast, but it's going to get much faster. I'm thinking something like at least 10 times faster around the time that some powerful AI company hands the keys to its data centers to its own AIs, its own AGIs, and says, make these metrics go up, build better versions of yourselves. Of course, it won't be a sharp transition like that, probably. It'll be a gradual automation. Currently, Copilot is already helping people code around the world, and ChatGPT is starting to help additionally because it's able to write longer chunks of code autonomously and also help debug code. The whole research cycle from coming up with ideas to discussing them to implementing them in code to running the experiments, all of that cycle will go much faster as bits and pieces of it get gradually automated by AIs. And then once we get to AGI, the whole cycle will be automated. This takes us to what I would call ASI, or artificial superintelligence. This is just AGI, except it's not just as good as a human remote worker. It's qualitatively better in every way to the best humans at everything. And also it's running at 100 times speed and there's 1 million of them. So that's a little story that depicts sort of what I think the natural progression is going to be by default. Quantitatively, what might that look like? Here's a graph. So there's fortunately now a literature on this. There's a literature on AI timelines where people try to predict how long we have until artificial general intelligence is developed and various other milestones besides that. There's also a small literature on trying to predict the pace of AI progress and the extent to which it might speed up around that time. The best report on it that I am aware of is done by Tom Davidson, and it was done in collaboration with this group called Epoch. They kindly made a handy widget that you can access at takeoffspeeds.com. So if you want to learn more about the report, you can just go there and browse around. And you can also fiddle with the variables of the model so that you can see what different possible futures might look like according to the model, depending on the different inputs. What we have here is what I would consider to be a representative, like this is the sort of, again, this is my belief. This is not Jeff's. This is not necessarily OpenAI's, but as a forecaster, this is what I think is like a typical future. I put in values to the variables that seems reasonable to me, and this is what I got. So if you look at this graph, the x-axis is years. We have 2024, 2025, 2026, 2027. The y-axis is orders of magnitude. Orders of magnitude of what? Well, it depends on what you're being plotted here. So we have money spent on flop which is compute globally. We have how much compute you can get per dollar. So how good the chips actually are. We have some other variables in here. I'll draw your attention to the green one, which is software. So this represents how much performance you get on the various metrics that you care about as a function of how much you invested in terms of compute. And so when it's going up very fast right here, that means progress has accelerated a lot. That means that, you know, if you sort of zoom in, it's like crossing an order of magnitude in like a month or so for several months. What that means roughly is that we have a period of several months where the AIs available at one time are as powerful as 10 times bigger AIs would have been at the previous time, like a month in the past, on all the metrics that we care about, you know, performance on various tasks. This is, you know, like all models, this model is a simplification. This one's based on economic growth models, so it fits to past trends of progress in various metrics, and then it tries to model how these things start to feed into each other once we get close to full automation. It has a sort of like here you can see this line for 20% automation, and then here this vertical line is 100% automation. Anyhow, if you want to learn more about that, you can go read about it. But what the high level takeaway that I have from this is that this isn't just a story that you can tell about AI speeding things up. It's sort of backed up by the best attempts to model the scenario that I'm aware of. Okay, so what happens once we get artificial superintelligence? I'll try to be brief, and we can talk about this more in the Q&A, but the short answer is takeover is eminently possible. I think that history gives us tons of historical precedents for this. If you look at different human groups in conflict with each other, groups with superior technology tend to have a huge advantage. Groups with superior leadership tend to have a huge advantage. Groups with superior morale tend to have huge advantages. If you sort of go through the list of advantages and think about a scenario in which there is some small human faction that has artificial superintelligence on its side up against some other human faction, possibly even the rest of the world, it seems like a lot of the advantages are going to be heavily in favor of the side that has superintelligence. Historically, we've seen tiny groups go on to conquer pretty much the whole world at certain points. I have this image up here from when the Spanish and Portuguese conquered most of the oceans in about 50 years. So, you know, at this abstract level, I think it's quite plausible. And then we can get into details if you like. You can ask me for specific scenarios. But you know, the bottom line conclusion that I claim is that you know, whoever controls superintelligence will rule the world. Or at least they could if they want to. Maybe they will be ethical and will refrain from exercising that power, but they'll have the power. Obviously, this is very scary. Who gets this power and what they do with it matters quite a lot. But there's something else that's sort of even scarier, which is that it is currently expected that our methods for controlling and aligning neural nets are not going to keep working as they get smarter. We can say a lot more about why that is, but I'll just have like 2 bullet point summary. One, they might generalize in ways we didn't expect or intend. Example, perhaps we're training it to be honest, but what it actually learns is to do whatever it takes to get positive reinforcement. Perhaps that even performs better in training than the honest strategy. Another thing, we can't actually understand what they're thinking. So mechinterp stands for mechanistic interpretability. This was referenced in the video. These things are not software in the ordinary sense. We're not programming them, we're training them. So we just have this giant tangle of neurons at the end, and we have to try to pore through them and figure out what kind of computations they're doing. And we can't just observe whether or not they are being honest or what their goals are or anything like that. Another thing, arguably the even more important thing, is the governance problem. So I think that the alignment problem is solvable, probably. Like if a lot of good people think about it very carefully and do lots of experiments, I think we can probably eventually figure out how to make safe AGI and safe superintelligence. However, we're not going to have very much time. It's going to be taking place over a period of months to years and possibly just weeks. And there's currently not a unified AI project that the whole world is joined up in. Instead, there's a bunch of different AI projects that are racing against each other. And so there's going to be tremendous competitive pressure to move fast and break things, or else the bad guys win. And in that environment, I'm rather pessimistic that we are going to solve the alignment problems that we need to solve in time. Which is why I think the most likely outcome is takeover by unaligned AIs. I think that during the race, all sides will probably sacrifice safety and for the sake of speed, and one way or another, things will get out of control. That's my guess. Other people at OpenAI are much more optimistic than me. I think I'm one of the more grim people here. I think that if you go and ask the average person working on AGI at OpenAI, they'll tend to be more optimistic that our systems will generalize in the way that we hope they will. And they'll also tend to be more optimistic that things will sort of progress more slowly and that we'll have a chance to notice and fix alignment problems before it's too late. We can talk more about the solutions in the Q&A, so I'll basically wrap up. But yeah, there's a bunch of things that can be done and that I encourage people to think about and start working on. All right, I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
All right, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I'll be talking about what the super alignment team is working on. We used to be called the alignment team. Now Ilya joined, we're called the super. I guess historically alignment arose from just thinking about how to train models to do what humans want. And I think it's actually, now it seems kind of straightforward. I think you just reinforce the behavior that looks good to humans and penalize behavior that looks bad to humans. So I think it really gets interesting in the superhuman regime, hence the super part. But at a very high level, you can imagine a simple story for training models to do what we want, which is just, I have some task in mind. Oh, and by the way, I think this whole thing about alignment is also ignoring issues like, well, how do we actually choose what's wise in terms of what we actually want the AI to do and stuff like that. I think that's like very, very important. But we're just putting that aside and assuming we know what we want the AI to do, how do we get it to do it? Okay, so I have some, imagine I have some task in my mind. In my heart, I understand what I want the AI to do. And you can kind of decompose success into 3 criteria. One is I represent the task, doing the task well in some way via some training signal. And the training signal is typically anchored to some particular training distribution. So it'd be I give examples of driving a car or whatever, and the distribution of scenarios in which I, gave these training examples would be all the actual driving that happened. And we want to, have good drivers basically. And then there's optimization, which is if the training signal represents the task well, then after we train the model, the behavior is good on the training distribution. And then thirdly, there's if the behavior is good on the training distribution, it's good everywhere. So we call that generalization. And kind of by definition, if we solve all 3 of these, we're done. Then we have the property that the AI drives the car well in all scenarios. And importantly, I think as models get larger, optimization gets easier. I think we see this time and time again with neural nets. But nothing changes about our oversight procedure. So for example, if we're trying to do harder and harder tasks, humans are going to get worse and worse at representing the training signal. And generalization, I think it's just unclear. They're kind of competing phenomena and we don't understand it that well. So overall, I'd say in the superhuman regime, it's not really clear that we can just train models to do what we want. And yeah, one interesting thing is the size of the training distribution lets us lean more on either oversight or generalization. So you could imagine like trying to oversee everything. That is, there's like some crazy scenario of car driving, or like some very like some code that's extremely hard to debug, and we still want to tell the AI like how to find the bug or how to drive properly. And if somehow we oversee all the examples we care about, then we can definitely train the AI correctly, and that would be relying entirely on oversight. And you could also imagine the training distribution is really small, so we barely give it any examples. All we say is drive well or something, and then it just magically drives well, and that would be relying a lot on generalization. So this motivates two of the main things the super alignment team is working on. I'd say kind of superhuman oversight and superhuman generalization. And then, yeah, we also want to evaluate our alignment methods. So a very rough plan is something like, we're going to train the best misalignment model organism we can. So you can imagine we purposefully train a model that sort of, let's say it's like a code writing model or something. And then there's some condition under which this model will reason about what it wants and then actually insert some backdoor in the code or something like that. And recently Anthropic has released some details about like ways to do things like this. So you could look at that if you're interested. And then we want to be able to test our oversight and generalization techniques to see whether we would be able to fix that misalignment. And even if we can't fix it, maybe at least we can detect the fact that it's misaligned. And to do that, so oversight and generalization are mostly looking at behavioral properties, but we can also try interpretability techniques where we look at the model and we see some, strange neurons or some strange behavior. And through that, we get a, some kind of hunch that it's misaligned, let's say. So that's our two other projects are basically, this kind of training misaligned models and the interpretability. So overall hopes. I think there's a very, very broad assumption that we're making generally that we'll get helpful models before extremely misaligned models. That's one of the things our strategy is kind of relying on. And because of that, you can use these so we're just kind of shooting for the best alignment methods we can that at least work for these toy misaligned models. And then we can kind of use these aligned models as Daniel pointed out, once you have something that's kind of like AGI, you can use it to do a lot of R&D. And our hope is that, we'll use it to do alignment R&D, and that will kind of let us bootstrap safely to the ASI scenario. And of course, even with alignment solved, there's just tons of problems for society to solve that I'm putting aside. So like preventing misuse, we're going to need to do a lot of like good security and coordinating with other AI labs and governments. We're going to want to possibly prevent exacerbation of power imbalances in general. Like you shouldn't trust OpenAI to like, train artificial superintelligence, and we're going to need to deal with job loss and stuff like that. And eventually we're going to be thinking about, what's the future of these models? Like, are there model welfare issues? Do we just want them to keep serving humanity, and is humans as we see it like what we want? But that's kind of overview of what super alignment's up to and how we fit into the big picture. And try to go quickly. So now I guess it's time for Q&A.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. I think it was a very interesting talk. Now, if you can stop sharing your slides, we will try to show the video again that we wanted to show before, and otherwise we'll move on to the moderation part. Never mind. I think we'll just go to the moderation part. Oh, it does work.
And one of the things that worries me most about the development of AI at this point,
So do I need to invest in the AI so I can have one with
that
me?
we seem unable to marshal an appropriate emotional response to the dangers that lie ahead.
Right now, we're at a fork in the road. This is the most important fork that humanity has reached in its over 100,000 years on this planet. We're building effectively a new species that's smarter than us.
It's as if aliens had landed, but we didn't really take it in because they speak good English.
We think that regulatory intervention by governments will be critical to mitigate the risks of increasingly powerful models. For example, the US government might consider a combination of licensing and testing requirements for development and release of AI models above a threshold of capabilities.
Humans have kind of changed the environment on Earth very significantly as a result of our intelligence relative to other species, and that's had, significant consequences for some species and for the biosphere in general. Common sense tells you that something similar might happen if we invent something more intelligent than us.
Arguably, we are on the event horizon of the black hole that is artificial superintelligence.
If we were to write a book about the folly of the history of human hubris, dealing with nukes and AI and things like that, we could easily have the last chapter in that book if we are not more careful about confident, wrong ideas.
It's possible that there's no way we will control these superintelligences and that humanity is just a passing phase in the evolution of intelligence.
Most observers and experts would say we're on this path towards superhuman intelligence and we're not prepared for success. We're investing hundreds of billions of dollars into a technology that, if eventually it succeeds, could be civilization ending, could be a huge catastrophe.
I have not met anyone right now in this lab who says that, sure, the risk is less than 1% of blowing up the planet. It's important that people know that their lives are being risked by these very particular experiments.
Let's be clear. They're racing for their own personal gain, for their own glory, towards an existential catastrophe that no one has consented to.
We just had a little baby, and I keep asking myself, how old is he even gonna get, and I said to my wife recently, it feels a little bit like I was just diagnosed with some sort of cancer, which has some risk of dying from and some risk of surviving, except this is the kind of cancer which will kill all of humanity.
If somebody's listening to this and they're young and trying to figure out what to do with their life, what advice would you give them?
All right, that was still a part of the video, which maybe sets the tone for how important this problem is. So we also have another speaker here, which is Jacob Hilton. Jacob Hilton, very nice that you're here. So let's introduce him quickly. He works at the Alignment Research Center as a researcher on the theory team. And before that, he worked at OpenAI on various topics, including interpretability and reinforcement learning from human feedback. He has a PhD in combinatorial set theory, and he also likes music and plays the accordion. So very nice to have you here.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Perfect. Nice. So we have a moderation session where I will just have ask a couple questions to our guests, which I've prepared beforehand. Then afterwards, we have time for the Q&A, and we'll also have a break around 15 to 20 minutes into the Q&A. You'll see in a bit the QR code on the screen. And with this QR code, you can scan it or fill in the link, and this is where you can ask your questions. And so these questions, you can upvote each other's questions. So if you think that one particular question is very interesting, you can upvote that, and we'll pick out of the top questions that are there. All right. So let's start with asking you some questions. You see the QR code here, and we'll leave it there for a couple of minutes, and then we'll take it away. So make sure to write it down and open the Slido website. All right. So maybe as an introductory question, so you've shared what you're doing, and I would like to know what you are currently working on more specifically, and why do you think it is important? Maybe Jacob, you can start.
Sounds good. Yeah. So at the Alignment Research Center on the theory team, we're currently working on a sort of method for formal verification for neural networks. I think the goal is similar in spirit to mechanistic interpretability. In other words, we'd like to be able to sort of take a trained neural network and sort of reverse engineer it, so that we can check what it's doing and make sure that we could spot things that it's doing that we don't want it to do. The main difference is that we're trying to work towards an approach which doesn't have humans in the loop, so that we could potentially automate the verification of a large neural network. And it's somewhat early stage research. It's pretty theoretical. We're not doing many experiments on neural networks yet. We hope that we will be at some point in the near future. So yeah, that's a brief summary.
Yeah, interesting. So if I would paraphrase it, you try to mathematically prove whether systems are safe. And you really try to do it from the ground up by looking at really the tiny details of the model.
That's the right idea. We think that proof isn't proving that a network satisfies desirable properties might actually be too computationally expensive. And so we're thinking about alternative ways that you could formally verify, sort of more probabilistic than a sort of formal proof. But that's, I think, the right idea and spirit.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. And so, Daniel, so you're currently working a lot on forecasting, but also on policy research. Can you share maybe specifically which project you are working on?
So now I'm on a different team. I'm on a team that's working on actual AI. I'm on my capabilities team, and I'm there trying to think about faithfulness in chain of thought. So another angle on getting interpretability is if we can make a system that has the neurons, the weights, etc., but also does lots and lots of English text in order to think. Like if it sort of does lots of thinking to itself with the chain of thought. If you've seen like Auto GPT or Chaos GPT, there's a YouTube video that sort of gives an example of the sort of system I have in mind. If we can I'm trying to figure out a way to train a system to put its high-level thoughts in text so that someone can just read the text and see what it's thinking. I think that would be a sort of like shortcut to interpretability if we could get that working.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks. And Jeff, can you share what you are currently working on?
Yeah, so I guess I mentioned kind of four sub-projects within superalignment. I'm kind of working on two of them, basically generalization and interpretability. And I'd say, broadly speaking, trying to figure out things like to what extent are models learning kind of, how could we discover if models have spurious behaviors that are induced by their training processes? So like, maybe it has some like weird bias induced by the training data set. And how do we see whether or not it's learning like, concepts that we actually think generalize to in like a natural human way. And part of the motivation is also just like, I think we really don't have alignment schemes that obviously work on paper. But I think there's a decent chance that models will just like behave in a reasonable way if we train them the way we do, at least just in practice. And maybe we can at least get a little bit more confident about that if we know how to look at them and test them well.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so we've also heard Daniel talking about when we can expect certain developments on AI with his plot, in which years we can expect certain developments to happen. But he also mentioned that he's maybe one of the more pessimistic outlooks and maybe has shorter timelines. So he thinks like that very powerful AI will arrive earlier than others. So I'm also curious to hear Jeff and Jacob's opinion on this. Maybe Jacob, you can start. What do you think a very powerful AI will arrive? And how likely do you think that will end very badly for humanity?
Yeah, I definitely have very wide error bars. I think the sort of intelligence explosion at the kind of rate that was on Daniel's graph is a distinct possibility, but I probably wouldn't guess that's the most likely outcome. I think, I guess I would imagine probably a longer timeline. So I think the point we get a feedback loop like that, I would guess, is more like 15 years plus away, possibly longer, but still very uncertain. And I think the probability of human extinction, I think, I don't know, to pick a number, somewhere between 5 and 10%, but I don't really know. That's kind of just a made up number. I guess the way I think about it is more that if AI is sort of lives up to its promise, then it'll sort of pretty radically alter society and civilization in many ways. And the question is really just like, will society as a whole manage to survive given sort of like those changes? And it's going to interact with many other many other aspects of the way the world works, including sort of biological risks, and as well as the kind of misalignment concerns that Daniel mentioned. And so, yeah, I think it's like extremely hard to just like give an overall guess of like what will be the final trajectory of human civilization, but that's like a rough summary.
Yeah, it makes sense. Of course, there's so many factors at play that it's very hard to predict the future well, and putting one specific number in it might not represent your uncertainty about beliefs. So that's indeed important that you mentioned. There are very high error bars, so it's very uncertain. It's hard to predict. And this is also indeed something that we've hinted at before this evening. It's just very difficult to know what's going on, but that's also a reason to be very careful with what we're doing. And so, Jeff, how do you look at this?
Yeah, I think I basically agree with both what you and Jacob said. I would say I feel pretty uncertain about things. Like, I think the important thing is just that, you know, it's hard to rule out these possibilities, and that alone, I think, is enough of a reason to be thinking about them. I would probably defer to Daniel on specifics of, you know, the dynamics and stuff like that. My personal intuition is probably similar to Jacob's, like something like you see really crazy town something like 15 years out. And in terms of obviously bad outcomes, yeah, one way I tend to think of that is like, I think power tends to concentrate in general. And the question is like, where is the power going to concentrate in the end? Is it like a coffee making AI? Is it like, you know, Putin? Is it like some wise AI or some Sam Altman or like some, you know, like coalition of governments that's actually like representing people democratically or something? Like, I don't really know where the power is going to concentrate. I think there's like very, very broad spectrum of possible outcomes just based on like, even if you just imagine picking a random human and they get to like decide the AI's values, I think that's like, even that's scary. And, you know, whether or not certain things are considered extinction risk, I think it's like, there are a lot of outcomes in between even. But I think like, you know, a lot is on the line no matter what. I think there's at least probably a 5% chance of like very obviously bleak outcomes, and then probably a bunch where it would be up for debate.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Indeed, a lot of people point also more like structural risks, the effect that AI will have on a general society and how society might change in a way that's hard to predict. And it's not like a clear extinction, but the society will change in many ways that it ends up at a very bad situation. Well, thank you for sharing. So indeed, it seems that there are really big risks involved. Of course, there are also a lot of benefits. So OpenAI as an organization needs to kind of somewhat balance, like, when do we think a model will lead to more benefits to society, or when will it cause maybe more risks? And so in some cases, it might just turn out that people at OpenAI think that releasing or even training a model is too dangerous to do. So could you maybe hint at the decision process, and how do these decision processes work at OpenAI on whether to train or release a certain model? I'm not sure who will answer this best, but please go ahead.
Well, I mean, we do have a process. The short answer is the leadership of OpenAI decides, but there's a special board that meets to discuss those sorts of questions. yeah, and then they consider a bunch of factors among those ones that you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, one additional comment is that I think it's probably important to have independent oversight, whether or not people sort of trust sort of the motivations of people working at OpenAI. I think it's reasonable for the public to expect an independent oversight process on the most high stakes questions.
Yeah.
And on that topic, like another team at my organization, the Alignment Research Center, the evals team is working on being able to sort of independently audit models that are trained within labs to check what they're capable of and whether they could pose dangers.
Another thing I'll add to that is that I think currently when people talk about deployment, they think about making the AI deployed to some broad public. But increasingly, it'll be important to gate the internal deployment of AIs such that they can't be used by hundreds of employees to accelerate their research and things like that. And also important to gate the training of AIs in the first place, because super intelligence, for example, would not be safe to train. And something less than super intelligence might be safe to train, but not safe to let talk to hundreds of employees and have hundreds of employees, give it access to their laptops and stuff. So I think it's increasingly we need to be in a world where these conversations are being had at the start of a training run and then throughout the training run, rather than just about product deployment.
Yeah, all right, that makes a lot of sense. I have one more question and then we'll move on to the Q&A part. So critics of OpenAI, they sometimes argue that there's an assumption that AI alignment will be easy. Like you've also hinted at this in your presentation. And so one specific point of disagreement is whether we will get warning shots. So a warning shot would entail that something really bad happens, that kind of illustrates to a very broad audience that AI is actually very dangerous. So a prominent AI safety researcher, Don Wentworth, has written that thinking we will probably get a warning shot makes sense to me. Relying on a warning shot while plowing ahead, building AGI is idiotic. So of course there are many debates on certain elements, but the key fact here, or the key issue that some people have, is that there's just uncertainty whether we will get warning shots, for example. So what do you think of this argument, that OpenAI might assume that alignment is relatively easy? So I'm curious to hear your perspective on this.
I have to say, I think, I agree with the perspective that, like, personally, my intuition is that warning shots are quite likely and that people are already waking up to the dangers of AI in a relatively serious way. I do think that we don't want to necessarily rely on the fact that we're going to see, a fairly realistic example of the kind of takeover scenario before it actually happens. Like it tries to take over, but like only manages to take over one city or something, or one city's worth, let's say, of compute. I do think that like we shouldn't be relying on scenarios like that. And definitely in terms of OpenAI's posturing around like the easiness versus hardness of alignment, I would say like internally there's a pretty wide spectrum of beliefs. There are definitely people who take the kind of risks. Like I think a lot of the people who think most about these things are taking the risks quite seriously. But it is hard to say. It's a complicated organization with a lot of people and stuff like that. So hopefully, we'll be held accountable in the end by some combination of like, general coordination between people and general norms. Like hopefully the wider public will establish like these are the conditions under which we'd be happy to see AI deployed or something like that. And it needs to not just be OpenAI, because there are other companies training AI like very seriously in the game. But I don't know. I think the risks are real for sure.
Yeah. So if I hear you correctly, there are people with many different views, and the structure of OpenAI doesn't make it very easy to have a certain viewing point. And Daniel, you want to add to this?
And in
Yeah, I just
particular,
want-
we need to have public things that where the posturing is that like we have things under control. But I think, yeah, there needs to be things that say you really, really have things under control, and like some auditor comes and looks and decides that that's true.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize the diversity within OpenAI. There's people who basically don't think these are problems at all. There's people who don't really think that AGI is a thing and just have a very different sense of what's going to happen. And then there's people like me, and there's all sorts of things in between. And I think that this often has confused people. I think a lot of people, a lot of people I've talked to have been like, OpenAI is like saying this and doing this, but also saying this and doing this. Like, what the heck? How is this consistent? And the answer is it's not necessarily consistent. There's different people at OpenAI pushing in different directions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's indeed very important to know when people read about OpenAI. I've also had this, that you think it's inconsistent, but there are just many different people with different viewpoints. And it's important to keep in mind that these differences just exist. And I also think it's great that you are also here to interact with other people, and that it seems that quite a lot of alignment researchers at OpenAI also collaborate or work a lot with people who do research about AI safety outside of these organizations. So that's great. That's great to see that this collaboration indeed does exist. All right, so now let's get to the Q&A. So there are many questions here. I think one of the important questions that was upvoted quite a lot early on, and which might be a good baseline to think about, is, and Daniel, you just mentioned this as well, that some people were wondering whether you actually think that AGI is possible. It seems like that most people here, at least the four of us, would think that AGI is possible. But maybe could you allude to some arguments why people think this is not the case, and maybe have your response to this as well. Yeah, it's a question to the room, and anyone who wants to answer, feel free to go ahead.
I guess I'll take this one. So the question is, do you think AGI is possible? Yes. And what are the arguments that it's not possible, and what are your counter arguments? Well, there's a lot of different arguments that it's not possible, and honestly, I don't really think any of them are good. Let me think. So some people think that there's something special about how the human brain works that makes it capable of general intelligence, and that there's something limited about the software, the artificial neural nets that we're currently building, and the methods that we have for training them, such that no matter how big we make them, and no matter how long we train them on no matter how many diverse tasks, they're just never going to have some key skills that are necessary in order to be the sort of virtual worker that could accelerate AI R&D. But I think I've had lots of trouble getting a really plausible account of that. Like, what are these key skills that cannot be learned by making bigger neural nets and training them longer on those tasks? So some people would say things like causal reasoning, or just reasoning. Some people still think that like AIs can't reason, or at least not neural nets. Some people would say concept formation. They can't form new concepts. They can only like reuse existing concepts. Some people would say they can only interpolate. They can't extrapolate. I know there's a bunch of things like this, and I'm pretty cynical about all of this because I feel like this has been happening for the last decade. People have been saying like, oh, they can do this, but they can't do that. And then like 2 years later, they're doing it, And I don't see any reason in principle why it's not going to work. The human brain is a circuit. It's a big bag of circuitry. We are also making big bags of artificial circuitry, and seems to me like it's at least in principle possible, and also more likely than not, that when we make the bags big enough and train them long enough on enough diverse relevant tasks, they will start to get as good as we are or better. And I think that the recent history of AI has borne out that hypothesis quite a lot. Yeah. I could say more if you like. I could talk about timelines. So it's one thing to talk about whether or not AGI is possible. Then there's the question of like, how far away is it? And I think there's much more to say there. I think, for example, some people would make the comparison to the human brain and say that current systems are much smaller than the human brain. And so that would be some evidence that we're going to need to make them several orders of magnitude bigger. And then that means that we're going to need this more compute, and that's going to take time to build and develop. So we can get into that if you like, but I'll stop talking and go to the next questions.
Yeah, no, thanks for your answer. Do Jeff or Jacob have anything to add? Do you think maybe in one or two sentences? Do you think that AGI is possible and possible within a reasonable number of years?
Yeah, I think the within reasonable number of years is more uncertain. I do tend to think that AGI is possible. I guess there's also a question of what you mean. Like certainly we can have children, for example, right? Like does that count as humans creating AGI? Or and like, if it does, let's say we say via other means, like what is this actual special sauce that lets us create children and stuff like that? Like certainly we can create things that are smarter than us in various ways, like we can make calculators and stuff like that. I think it's not really clear exactly what the bottleneck would be. And it seems like in principle, you could probably just reverse engineer humans and, just like reprogram that. Yeah, I guess I also do tend to have the view that you have a big blob of compute and you just train it somehow. Like there's some strategy like that works. I'm a little less sure about the timelines, but I think it's probably not that far away, just given all the evidence and trajectory from the last 10 years.
Yeah, and probably a pretty similar view, maybe with slightly wider error bars. Like I think the arguments in principle, you can sort of train a network to do more or less anything that a human can do, like based on sort of approximate, results about neural networks approximating things and scaling laws and the empirical evidence. I think it's all tells a relatively compelling story, but it's certainly uncertain enough to extrapolation is always uncertain. So I would say it's more likely than not that I would guess that sort of like the rough scaling hypothesis, big blob of compute is like roughly accurate, but certainly not guaranteed. I'd probably maybe put like 30% chance, 40% chance on that kind of hypothesis being totally wrong.
Yeah, all right. So it seems like it does appear that AI is currently already very powerful, and we can think about what exactly constitutes an AGI, and there's still just general uncertainty. But also with the trends that we've seen over the last year, we can, with some decent amount of certainty, extrapolate what kind of things an AI will do relatively soon into the future. And then we can kind of start to think, oh, is this an AGI or not? But at least it will be very powerful and posing risks.
Yeah, I mean, even 1 to 2 years. Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to second that thing about the scaling laws. Like you can look at trends of AI performance on various benchmarks, and you can draw lines through those trends and extrapolate. And that's largely what I've been doing, and that's why I got 2027 as my 50% mark. I have a lot of uncertainty too. Could be sooner than 2027, could be later. But when I eyeball those trends, it seems like it's going to be a drop-in replacement for a human remote worker around 2027.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Again, another question is, oh, yeah, I think we'll just move on to the next question so we get more people's questions in there. So Sander is asking, if OpenAI's concern is safety, how is centralizing control of AI technologies and limiting external scrutiny safer than a more open democratic approach? So this relates to the debate that has been going on, like, should we make all of our models open to the public? And there is, of course, significant debate going on about this. Maybe Jacob, you can answer this.
Yeah, sure. So with the obvious caveat that I think none of us are talking for OpenAI, but especially not me, given that I don't work at OpenAI anymore. I think, yeah, I think it's a very reasonable question. I think the history of open source suggests something in the direction of, when there's widespread democratic access to a technology, that tends to provide some sort of, obviously sort of large scale benefits and some kind of like balance in some sense. I think there are definitely arguments in the other direction. I think in the near term, the most obvious one is access to knowledge of that could help democratize access to sort of bioweapons and exacerbate biological risks. That seems to me like the most obvious immediate term risk. If the next generation model is like capable enough to sort of seriously exacerbate risks, it's probably not really a viable approach to sort of just open source the weights of that model. I think at this point, the experience that we've had with, say, GPT-4 is probably enough to, I would be relatively, I think I could probably be persuaded that open sourcing the weights of GPT-4 at this point wouldn't really pose a substantial risk. And then the decision is more about sort of like OpenAI's, commercial interests. But yeah, I don't think it's an obvious question moving forward. I think like caution is warranted when sort of like mainly because when you're training a new large model, you don't know what its capabilities are going to be, because of the very nature of this sort of like black box approach. And I think having, I think sort of like, to me, it seems like I would rather see a default of when an X model is trained, there's like a period of more sort of closed access before sort of just like fully open source or something like that. But yeah, I can definitely see arguments either way.
Yeah, right, that makes sense. Maybe Daniel, if you have something to say.
Yeah, I just want to add real quick. The classic thing is that if we haven't actually figured out how to make it safe, then giving it to everybody makes things a lot worse. If it's not going to fall, like if we haven't solved the alignment problem, that means we haven't figured out how to make it do what we want. And if we give it to everyone, then everyone's going to have something that's not going to do what they want. And I think I'm generally a fan of open sourcing things, and I'm obviously a fan of distributing power widely. But in this case, that would just mean suicide for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a serious question. And also like, like part of it is also about, is AI technology more like a nuke, or is it more like, a knife or something? Like knives are also very unsafe. But it's totally okay to give them to everyone, probably. And then they're in between cases like guns, where it's like, reasonable people can argue about whether or not that should be centralized. But I definitely agree that there are downsides to our style of closeness. Like certainly it would be better if a lot of people could examine the model behavior and like, do serious questioning of, like auditing of the models and stuff like that. And hopefully the API like makes it a little like it's a little bit of a compromise there. Or but I think the centralized control question is like, I don't know, it's more unclear to me and feels like it depends on basically the scope of the possible harms.
Yeah, so like similarly, like Jacob said, for the models like GPT-4 and below, I think open sourcing sounds great.
And afterwards it might get too dangerous. I think there are just so many dynamics at play, and it's very hard. But we should be wary. There are definitely downsides to centralized control, and with the API access and maybe allowing external organizations to also audit the models, such as the Alignment Research Center, we might strike some bit of a balance. But there's maybe no ideal way to manage how much we open source these models. All right, very interesting, and we see that there's a lot of discussion. But there are also 600 questions exactly as we speak. So from now on, we'll try to go through these questions a little bit faster. So at least people have more chance that their question is actually answered. So Daniel, you seem to have like more pessimistic perspectives, or maybe realistic, but at least less flourishing images of the future. So RetroWheels.store is asking, what are you personally doing to prepare yourself for the apocalypse? In question mark.
I mean, I'm working on alignment at OpenAI. I think. I think Sam Altman has a bunker somewhere, but even he admits that like that's not going to help for an AI apocalypse, at least, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, you're just working on the technical problem, hope you can solve it, and hope Sam Altman will give you access to his bunker, which probably will not even work.
Oh, the bunker is useless. I would not go to the bunker.
Yeah, and so there's another question more about the job market. So is there anything we can do to prepare for a job market which is heavily influenced by AI that replaces jobs?
I guess.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I guess one thing I would say is like, yeah, first, it's kind of deeply unfair that, you know, a group of people can build AI and just like take everyone's jobs away. And in some sense, there's nothing you can do to stop them right now, except, you know, kind of petition for regulation, maybe raise awareness of just the problems that are possibly coming. If you think it's a real serious issue, just like getting people to think about this problem of what do we do in a world where labor is obsolete and, you know, like the GPU capital is the only thing that matters. Like, I don't know, raise awareness, get governments to care, get other people to care. Yeah. Or join us and have one of the few remaining jobs. I don't know. It's rough.
So you expect that because of an AGI system that might come soon to the future, there might not be many jobs anymore?
Yeah, so I mean, so obviously one thing you can do personally is you can think about like, what do I think the last jobs remaining will be? I think there could be very likely will be a very long tail of things that aren't done by AI. Like, for example, like rich old people will probably not want AI to care for them because like they might as well pay for a human if they have money, and like they probably prefer the human touch or whatever. So, you know, you could work at a nursing home or something, or I don't know if that's the best example, but you could go and think, what are the last remaining jobs? I think like really the society needs to, you know, just actually start preparing for this, and, you know, just like raising awareness is probably a good thing to do, because I would say like we can, as a society, we can cope. We can like redistribute income, and we can, you know, we can do things that would really mitigate the effects. And that's like the solution I would be looking for.
Yeah, all right, that makes sense.
To add to that, AGI is going to create tremendous wealth. And if that wealth is distributed, even if it's not equitably distributed, but if it's the closer it is to equitable distribution, it's going to make everyone incredibly wealthy if it's aligned, and if the people who control the AI, you know, make it aligned to everyone or something like that. Like there's tremendous risk here, both from it not being aligned, or the AIs not being aligned, and then nobody wins. But then also for them being aligned and doing what someone wants, but then that somebody wanting all the power for themselves or something like that. There's both risks are tremendous, but if we can avoid both of those risks, then I think you won't need a job, basically. Like, you'll be plenty happy, you'll be plenty wealthy, you won't need a job.
That would indeed be a very positive future, and we hope we're all in that. And you can basically do what you want, maybe with some life fulfillment in there still. Okay, very quick question. Did you use ChatGPT when you developed ChatGPT?
I currently use ChatGPT like several times a week, but not usually for coding tasks. Actually, I find it useful for like new types of coding I'm not very familiar with, but I don't tend to use it for like stuff where I'm more familiar personally. But other people definitely make more use of Copilot and so on than me.
Yeah, I think we're to the point where models are something like 1 to 5% boost in productivity. Or
Literally asked my coworkers that exact question, and that's what they say.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So another person is worried about that GPT's models training data comes from biased sources. They give the example that Wikipedia has 90% male contributors. So how do you prevent everything generated to be inherently unreliable?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it also, I mean, in a way, it existed before language models, right? Like, it's kind of bad if I go to Wikipedia and it's like, you know, history is written by whatever random group of people this is, and people find it trustworthy and whatnot. And maybe it's not. I personally, I just don't know. I'm not auditing, these Wikipedia editors. And that seems like a serious issue with just like how trust works in society and stuff. I don't know how to solve that. And it does seem like it's amplified by having language models. Like, it's probably creating even worse feedback loops, especially if, GPT generated data is everywhere. This kind of thing is already starting to happen. That didn't answer anything about what the solution is.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to add to that, I think that the fine-tuning, so it's important to distinguish between like the pre-training data and the fine-tuning data. So yeah, usually these models are trained very, very large scale and sort of like very enormous, but not very carefully curated data, and then they're fine-tuned to get something like ChatGPT. And a lot of the control in terms of how the model's final behavior is determined by like the fine-tuning data. And so like that's the main mitigation in place right now for sort of steering models so that they are safe and also unbiased to some extent. Obviously, it's not completely successful. With that said, there are definitely sort of like subtler biases that are going to come in from the pre-training data as well, and also certain capabilities that may or may not be desirable is going to like filtering the pre-trained data is going to be like a very important step as well. But yeah, worth appreciating from a technical perspective. Like it's like two almost kind of separate questions about data collection.
Yeah, so there, like, after the pre-training, there are still steps being taken, such as reinforcement learning from human feedback, which tries to mitigate the biases in these models. But it's just still very hard to make sure that the model is not biased, if I can paraphrase that correctly. And so another person is asking, do you think it is possible to reach a global policy on AI, or will it be more similar like today, where people strive for a bigger version of a weapon than the other?
I think it's possible. It's actually where most of my hope lies. I think that as long as we have different AI companies and nations competing with each other to have the best AIs, we are pretty doomed, because people will not slow down and figure out what they're doing and solve the relevant alignment problems. But there is precedent for international cooperation on big, important technological things. And so I'm hopeful that something like this will happen. I think the situation is completely different and way more optimistic if there isn't this arms race pressure.
And obviously, worth pointing out, there's one obvious trend that would sort of you might expect more centralization, which is that training costs are sort of going up exponentially, and so that you might expect that there are sort of fewer and fewer actors who are able to afford to sort of train frontier models, which might make coordination easier. Now, obviously, actually making sure the coordination happens is another thing, but that's like another consideration that affects things.
Yeah, it does seem like very nice if you followed the news over the last year. It does seem that a lot of things are happening on the policy side, which is also described in the video that we saw before. And this might make us more hopeful that indeed these race dynamics and like arms races are being diminished, so that there's more freedom to really slow down, for example, when it's needed. And this ties into to another question. The question here is, how likely is it that OpenAI or other companies will pause AI development until we have aligned them? So this probably very strongly relates to the race dynamics at hand. So maybe we can sketch out two scenarios. One scenario is where there is some global policy which really reduces the race dynamics, and in one scenario there are just race dynamics. So how likely do you think that OpenAI will pause in time? And maybe Jeff or Daniel, you can allude to this since you are working there.
Yeah, I think it's hard to, I definitely think it's hard to extricate like we're just like a business making these products better and better and stuff from the like, we're trying to save humanity from AGI stuff. And like, but I do have some hope that like, I would say if there was just some very clear, like, first of all, we should try to lay out clear conditions under which we would stop ahead of time. And I think this is the kind of thing that ARC evals is trying to help with. I think if there was something very clear, like, okay, it's very not okay for models to be this powerful and widely distributed and or more powerful. I'm somewhat optimistic that like the OpenAI board and leadership would like kind of listen to the light of reason and not like go ahead with it. But I think I don't know for sure. And also, yeah, the competitive pressures are very real, certainly. Yeah, I would say like trying to set standards and kind of coordinating between different AI labs is going to be pretty important.
Yeah, this seems indeed interesting. There are numerous initiatives here as well. For example, the Frontier Model Forum, which is a new forum that should help between communication between top AI companies to help communication, maybe set standards and share certain safety practices. And I also heard you saying ARC evals. So maybe to explain to the audience, this is the Alignment Research Center, ARC, so where Jacob works. And then there's the evals, which stands for model evaluations. So this is basically when you have a certain model and you try to evaluate what capability does it have, how well does it do a certain thing. And then the scenario that I think you alluded to is that there is some policy in place that companies need to meet these certain audits, or the model evaluation need to be done, and these dangerous capabilities that the model might have need to be below a certain limit for the company to continue training or to continue or to release a certain model. Did I paraphrase that correctly?
Yeah, it seems right.
All right. Yeah, nice. Then there's like some multiple questions that kind of relate to the same topic. Is that often we talked about alignment, and Jeff, as you also like mentioned in your presentation, is that you just assume that we kind of know what we want the AI to do as humans, but this assumption is what you also stated is like it's a very hard assumption. What do we actually want an AI to do? With which values do we want to align it? And so, how are you thinking about this at OpenAI? Or at ARC, like what do you think is important here to consider? Which values do we align it to?
Yeah, I think this is like definitely, I mean, OpenAI has released this thing about like democratic inputs and stuff like that. So I think implicitly we're already, a little bit taking sides. We're like, okay, we're pro-democracy basically. And I do think, first of all, yeah, like OpenAI probably shouldn't be deciding these things for everyone. Right now we are kind of like starting to think about this problem of what actually does a good future look like in terms of the values that we're loading these AIs with, because we have to, like, we're actually training these AIs. A bunch of questions come up about how it should reply when you ask different questions and stuff like that. And we would like to at least have a good process for this. I guess I feel like in terms of like, if you imagine there was a single AI trained for all of humanity or something, like how would you approach getting those values? I think I don't know. That's probably like a complicated political, socioeconomic, kind of philosophical question that
it's
should
probably
be
worth mentioning. Yeah, maybe one thing to add to that is that there are sort of like techniques which allow sort of like constitutional AI, where you sort of write down the principles you want the AI to follow. Now, there's definitely more than that determines how the AI behaves. There's a whole process for converting that constitution into a model, but nonetheless, you could imagine sort of like the basic set of principles that the AI is designed to follow is being codified in a document, and then what that document actually says is in theory, that's something that regulators might specify certain aspects of it. Perhaps there's some way of getting public input into what that constitution should be. So I think we it's hard to predict what kind of process people use to actually sort of make that decision, but like sort of the technical possibility is there to have a sort of like that's
so there might be some moral guidelines that people can reach through certain process that are kind of like generally or universally agreed upon to the most extent possible, and that this AI can follow this, and you maybe train the AI with, or like you fine tune the AI to follow these certain rules, and that's how we can maybe at least for now align AIs with values that we want. All right, so the other people are still working.
I wanted to add one more thing, which is definitely like people at OpenAI are not really experts on this. There are a bunch of people doing good work. Like I know there are a number of orgs thinking about this kind of question. One in particular that I remember is like the Collective Intelligence Project. So people who are interested should definitely go check it out. Sorry.
No, that's a good point. That's indeed a lot of people are actually working on this. All right. So maybe a final question more about your work specifically. So at OpenAI or at the Alignment Research Center, how much freedom do you get to pursue research directions that you think are promising? I think everyone can shortly say like how much freedom they experience in their job. So maybe Daniel can start, then Jeff, then Jacob.
I have quite a lot of freedom, probably more than I would have had in academia. Not quite as much as I'd like, but I think I have quite a lot.
Yeah, I mostly feel the same way. I think there's some like very broad mandates that come from top down, and those do get shaped a little bit over time, but mostly in ways that seem reasonable. And then other than that, like I think we have a decent amount of freedom, or at least it's like very much a discussion with your manager and stuff like that.
Yeah, when I was at OpenAI, similar story, plenty of freedom. I sort of felt like, mostly I wanted to work on projects that would help make AI safe or be, and like the organization was very supportive of that. At Alignment Research Center, we're mostly working on a single sort of research agenda, and within that, I am sort of like choosing each day what I think is the most promising route. But yeah, the agenda is more. It's more of like decided as a team, I guess, similar to teams at OpenAI, I guess.
Yeah, so there's a general direction basically, but you have quite a lot of freedom to navigate how you think this problem is best addressed. All right, so thank you. That concludes the part of the Q&A. But so maybe like a final question that I want to ask is, we've seen that the problem with AI is big, and it's also kind of urgent. And multiple people in the Q&A have asked, and I had this question before as well, it is, what can we actually do to change this? So what can people do now to help mitigate the issues that we have discussed here today? Maybe like everyone we can do the same round and quickly describe, like, hey, what can people currently do? People in the audience, for example.
Learn more about all of this, think more, talk to people about it, maybe get organized, start talking to your governments and stuff, try to have a say in what happens. But the main thing is learn more, understand what's going on. That would be my first recommendation.
I guess for people who are interested in technical AI research, there is just a lot to do. You can, obviously you can start reading about it if you want to get, like, I think you can do, for example, a master's in AI, and it's like probably reasonably easy to find things that connect to safety, like projects that would connect to safety. But even if it doesn't, like, I think just getting some experience is a good start. Obviously, if you feel ready, you can apply to OpenAI. For other paths besides technical AI research, I don't really feel like I'm the right person to give recommendations, but definitely I think 80,000 hours is actually a pretty good starting point. Like, they have coaching, and they'll for anyone like who's broadly looking to make a positive impact with their career, they're quite helpful, I think.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you. And we will provide more information what people can specifically do afterwards. And Jacob, do you still have
yeah, I'm not sure I have much to add. Yeah, I think be intellectually curious. Don't take my word for. Don't take any of our words for things. Think, read about things yourself. Try and I think we need people who are thoughtful and knowledgeable about like a wide range of topics. And probably Jeff gave more specific advice about like certain technical routes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So well, that concludes all the questions that we have here for you today. Thanks so much for coming. And it's very nice that you take the time to also inform the audience. And I think it shows that you really care about the problem. And yeah, that's good to see. Yeah, so all right. First, maybe it's a very big problem, and it seems that it's hard to do something. And I've often seen also in my personal life is that the people maybe read the issue and then they think I have no idea what to do, and I don't really know how to work on this problem anymore. So as a personal anecdote here is that so around 1.5 years ago, I first heard about like the issue of AI safety. And so indeed, as Daniel, for example, added to, is that I started learning more, talking to people, going to AI safety retreats where you have maybe a workshop where you spend multiple days talking to people and following lectures. But then I ran into the problems like, hey, why is there such little things happening in Europe? So for example, most of the major companies are in the Bay Area, like in Silicon Valley, in California, and also there's things happening in London. But in the rest of Europe, there's very little happening. Though there are all kinds of researchers here that are very motivated to contribute to the problem. So I saw this, and then I thought to myself, like, hey, why hasn't this happened? And such an organization really should exist. And the conclusion was really that no one just really did it, or they failed to pull through. And at that moment, I just like thought to myself, well, okay, I guess then I should do it. And people encouraged me to just do it. And then I found collaborators, and we just started the European Network for AI Safety. And that just leads to so many positive projects that we've been working on. So like the moral of this anecdote is that the field is still very young. It's still uncertain how AI will exactly go. And because such few people are working on this, as we saw in previous slides, there are so many great opportunities. And that's why it's also really exciting to work on this problem. So I really hope that you can feel this motivation as well, and then start to work on this problem too. And maybe like one thing that's worth to note, but which maybe have become clear throughout this evening, is that you can kind of contribute regardless of your background. There's definitely something you can do. So you can do technical AI safety research, but that doesn't mean that you need to study AI. You can also do philosophy, or you can do psychology, or all kinds of different things. You can still contribute to the research. And you can help with air governance, working in policy, reaching out to your political parties, and much more. And there's also a lot of field building to do, such as, for example, organizing this event. So the people who organized this just thought, okay, it should happen. And then we just went and did it. And of course, you run into issues. But still, you can actually do a lot if you really put yourself to it. And it doesn't really matter which background you specifically have. So what we also recommend to do is for our Dutch people, or people who are living in the Netherlands, I should say, you can join our nationwide WhatsApp community. Here we share information, you can share information, there are discussions, and there are announcements of certain events happening. And this is a good way to stay connected with people working on this problem. Then it's also, like Daniel specifically mentioned, there's the it's probably good to learn more about this problem. We've covered a lot, and still it's just very important also to just learn more, see what's exactly happening. And therefore there's an AI safety fundamentals course, and you can fill out an interest form if you want to contribute. Local groups throughout the Netherlands are running these courses, and they can either be about technical alignment, so really what do AI systems do, or about AI governance, what kind of policy, for example, can we create. And a lot of people who work in the field have done this course, me included. And then third, like, check out your local group. This is also still important, and it just allows you to stay connected and just makes approaching the whole problem so much easier. So these, in this QR code or at the link, we'll leave it here for a little bit, and we'll leave it after presentation still for some time. In this document, you can find all kinds of relevant information, as in what we shared before. You can find a link to the national WhatsApp community. You can find all kinds of relevant sources, so you can read more about the problem. And there are links for all the effective altruism and AI safety groups for each local city. So we really encourage you, like, to scan the QR code, go to the link, and I'm sure the document will be shared afterwards with all the participants as well, so you can still look at it then. All right, so these are like all the relevant resources, all the things we wanted to share, but of course we cannot end the night before we give credit where credit is due. So it's kind of interesting. So usually when you thank people, you get an applause, but our online setting, of course, doesn't allow this. But I'm sure that the applause would be ear deafening if if we could actually hear it. So first of all, I want to thank Alexandra Bos. She opened the session with a great presentation and shared about what effective altruism also does. And we really want to thank you for all your efforts. Then we have our OpenAI guests, Jeff Wu, Daniel Cockatello, sorry, and Jacob Hilton. Thank you so much for attending, and you really made this whole thing happen. And we're very thankful for your time. So Zoom and setting up this whole online webinar just takes a lot of effort and it requires a lot of knowledge. And then I want to thank our man behind the scene, Dushan Neshitz, for all your efforts. Thank you for all your work. And then the main person behind the whole event, who had the idea, who really pushed it forward, who organized most of the things, and is here, I think, in Eindhoven or Tilburg, Jelle Donders. Thank you so much. I think where you are in Eindhoven or Tilburg, you should probably go on stage and people should applaud for you, because thank you a lot for organizing this and giving everyone the chance to learn more. Then there are numerous volunteers, and if I look to my left, we have Daniel and Nadia, who have done like all kinds of organizations behind the scenes that made the whole event run as smoothly as possible, and James Herbert, who has helped with a lot of what kind of questions to ask, with setting up, getting people involved. So thank you for that. Then the local volunteers. So you're probably in a room somewhere, and these people had to do all kinds of things, sort out how BHV requirements could be satisfied. Thank you for all your effort in making this event possible. And thank you so much for more than 1,800 participants who we have throughout the Netherlands and online who've gathered here today. We hope that we have informed you and illustrated the importance of the issue. So as a last final ask, I would like to think that everyone thinks about the risk of the technology and critically make up your own mind and how you see this problem, and think about, and if you think it's an important issue, also do something about it. Reach out to your local groups, read the document. Those are great ways to start. And I hope you stay motivated in your endeavors. So thank you all for coming. It was a great pleasure to be your host, and I hope you have a great night. Thanks a lot.